literally every single thing that I've done, from all the ultra endurance events to writing Finding Ultra to starting the podcast, none of them had anything to do with like me setting a goal. Like they were really divine intervention, kind of the universe coming in to support this curiosity, which felt like real and earned and true to who I was.
We live in a complex and ever-changing world, a place that is maybe harder than ever to successfully navigate. The answer is surely to be brave, but it's also to seek and be open to guidance. Mentors are the one consistent through line in the lives of all accomplished people, myself included. So welcome to Mentor Buffet, a feast for those, like me, curious about who helped the most successful among us succeed. Rich Roll, the man who needs no introduction. Rich has been a friend and a mentor to me for a long time. I was nervous to sit down with him because I look up to him so much. In this episode, Rich talks about how he didn't have any good mentors when he was younger.
I didn't have great mentors most of my life. And I had a series of like really bad mentors that like were more counterproductive than productive.
And so he adapted a strong sense of self-reliance. It helped him achieve athletically and academically, but it was ultimately a muscle he needed to atrophy in favor of getting healthy when he became an alcoholic.
And I finally find my way into sobriety, and they tell me like, you got to forget about that self-will. You think it's helping you, it's actually harming you, because the more determined I was to solve it on my own without asking for help or receiving help, the deeper the hole was that I was digging for myself, and the more impossible it became to like crawl my way out of it.
We talked about multiple dramatic transformations Rich has made in his life and the people who helped him when he was ready to accept help.
Like I had to be in that instance, the, caterpillar turning into glop, before I could become the butterfly. And for me, that meant like the glop phase was like realizing that I alone was going to be unable to solve this problem.
This man comes from a real place. He has interviewed over 800 people on the Rich Roll podcast, and he's given me a chance to do something that's really challenging for me, but that I'm very interested in. He's a mentor to many and a mentor to me. Rich Roll.
There's something deranging about going on social media and seeing a lot of energy around arsonists and looters, and a lot of like finger wagging and finger pointing around blame and the mayor and the fire commissioner and all the discourse kind of around that stuff that is inflammatory and maybe, not helpful in the moment. Like at some point we need to look at what happened and do a forensic analysis of what went wrong and how we can be better in the future, better prepared, et cetera. But in the midst of like the inferno, like maybe not the right time and place for that. But my experience, like IRL, is real community. Like people really have come together. They're helping each other. They're sweeping the leaves off their neighbor's lawn. They're spraying their garden hose on their neighbor's house. Like there is this sense of togetherness that I think is the truth that you might miss if you're just on social media kind of engaging in, the outrage around, who we should be blaming for all of this.
Most people are coming together.
I think that's right.
It is very weird to start a new year and be like, okay, I had this feeling going into the new year, and then it got completely sideswiped, because I think everybody has a feeling going into the new year. And then it was like, we were all like stepping into it, and then it was just like, step aside for a second. And so we do hopefully have this opportunity soon to like find our way back to that feeling. But I'm not there yet because we're still in it.
Yeah, it's hard when you're in the midst of it. But, change is a fundamental, kind of substrate of the universe, right? And it's a test of your own equanimity. It's a challenge to the attachments that we have to material things and to expectations and to plans. And I've just learned that the best way to navigate these things is to adopt a neutral stance. Like, how can you be neutral and equanimous in the midst of chaos, that is your best chance to respond kind of in the best way rather than reactively or from a place of fear or resentment because I had my idea of what, January 2025 was going to be, and now it's something different, and I'm very upset about that. That's not really productive or helpful, but it's such an emotionally charged event. I mean, the level of devastation is so severe and extreme. It's truly surreal for people that aren't in Los Angeles to even wrap your head around the level of displacement that's happening right now and the reckoning to follow. Like, it's just going to be unprecedented in terms of, how we're going to kind of move forward as a collective, and every, individual and family trying to assess the damage. And, they say that the most disruptive things to somebody's life are like a breakup of a relationship or a change of job and moving, right? Well, what happens when your house burns down?
When you talk about neutrality, is it natural for you to be neutral now?
No. I've gotten better at it, but I wouldn't say it's natural.
So how do you do it then?
I think it's a practice, just like meditation or running or anything else. You have to develop like a reflex over time of putting it into action. And I mean, meditation is really the core practice of trying to just be present, because if you're truly present, there isn't room for fear because you're not engaging with the future or the past. So all of the suffering comes from our attachment to things and the fear that we project as a result of some fantasy of what's going to happen in the future or some story that we've concocted about what happened in the past.
As long as you're out of the danger, you're not in danger.
Right. In this very moment, everything is perfectly fine.
Yeah.
And your life is exactly as it would have been had the fire not happened, like in this precise moment.
Yeah, that's true.
And so what you learn, like this is something that I learned when I first got sober, this idea of surrender, right? You have to surrender to everything over which you have no control. And we don't have any control over this, truly. We have no control over most things. All we have control over is our response to what is happening around us and our thoughts and our actions.
I'm aware of your story. Like, I've read it, I've heard it, I've listened, and I am really, really curious if you're open to talking about like some of the people along your journey, and specifically starting with that sobriety journey, which was like, feels like chapter 1 of your major transformations or your major intersection points, unless you feel.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to talk about some of the mentors that I had before that.
Okay.
Because I think there's something relevant in there and also some stuff I haven't talked about before.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
So take me back before then.
This show is called Mentor Buffet, and the idea is like you share these people who are instrumental in kind of helping you become the person that you became, in hopes that you can learn lessons from these teachers or whoever they were, right? Like for these individuals, and in reflecting upon who those people are for me, to kind of get my head around doing this podcast today, I realized that like I didn't have great mentors most of my life. I mean, my parents, they're fine. But obviously when you're a young person, you're looking for other people, right, to guide you. And I had a series of like really bad mentors, not that like were more counterproductive than productive. The first one was my club swim coach in high school, junior high school and high school. So this guy ran like the biggest club swimming program in the greater Washington, D.C. area. And, I was committed to being the best swimmer that I could from like 8th grade to 12th grade. Mm-hmm. And he was my guy that was going to take me there. And I was somebody who didn't have the talent, the natural gifts of some of my peers. But I did learn that I could bridge that talent deficit gap by like working harder than everyone else. And so I was very committed, and I never missed a workout. And every morning I got up at 4:45, had practice from 5:15 to 7 a.m. and then after school from 4 to 6, and then a 3-hour workout on Saturday. And it became clear that I was more reliable to show up to the pool than my coach, to the point where he entrusted me with the keys because I would always arrive before him. And it wasn't until much later that I realized, like, oh, this guy is an alcoholic, and
oh, wow.
is waking up hungover and making it late to practice or missing practice. And on top of that, it would later get revealed that he was having a sexual relationship with my then girlfriend, my first girlfriend, that dated back to the point where I think the inception of it, she was 13 years old. And it went on for years. She was probably the most prominent Olympic hopeful in our area. She went on to the University of Texas, and at the 1988 Olympic trials was expected to win her event and go to Seoul. She had a terrible performance and kind of had a bit of a mental breakdown, to the point where her parents were so concerned that they, as I'm told, went into her journals to try to figure out what was going on with her, and realized that this relationship was going on, this inappropriate relationship. And they settled out of court at the time. This is back in the mid 1980s.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until, it's a really long story, but it wasn't until many, many, many years later, 2012, when this woman who had to put her life back together, moved to Texas, got married, has a family, realized that this coach was still coaching, because they sort of quietly settled out of court that so many years prior and had an NDA and the whole thing. And she was raising concerns with USA Swimming that went unheard. And she ultimately went to the Washington Post, and there was a reporter there who was sniffing around this story. And it became a front page news story, and this guy went to jail. So that was my first mentor. And it's confusing because on some level, he did guide my swimming career,
mm-hmm.
and was a positive force in that regard. And yet this incredibly negative force in so many other ways. And when you trust somebody like that, and then you realize that trust wasn't real, it makes you less trusting of other people.
It's so devastating. And
I'm not the victim there. I wasn't the victim in this equation by any stretch of the imagination, but it's like a lesson in growing up. Oh, you believe these adults, when they tell you whatever they're telling you, and then you realize oh, this is something altogether different. Then I went to college,
mm-hmm.
and I was at Stanford swimming. And then my coach there, who, again, my next mentor, was a Vietnam veteran sniper, and kind of ran the program like a military operation, and was very negative. He relied on negative reinforcement to inspire the team, which is something I don't respond to
mm-hmm.
well. I need optimism and positivity and hope and encouragement. And I don't think that served me well either. I mean, it was a learning experience.
What did it feel like to not have it then, but to still have goals and to still be you weren't limited from your path, but you didn't
just become self-reliant. I stopped looking for people to help me and just doubled down on my own self-will.
What did that feel like, though?
I mean, on some level, it's empowering. I'm in charge. I don't need anybody else. I'm going to figure this out. But I was also, for a lot of those years, messed up on alcohol and, making bad decisions, and didn't really have anyone looking out for me or pulling me aside and saying, hey, what are you doing? You're fucking up right now.
Yeah.
I mean, I think for me, to kind of synopsize it, I was bullied as a young person. I was very insecure and had difficulty making friends. I find this thing swimming. I fall in love with it. I'm actually pretty good at it. And I devote myself so completely to it. And I have this coach who is, kind of erratic. Let's just call him that. And so I just learned how to rely on myself. And so I developed this like internal capacity for self-will. And I was like, it's on me.
Mm-hmm.
No one's coming to solve this or guide me. It's just on my shoulders alone. And I took that responsibility and I applied it. And I was rewarded for it. Like I got good at swimming. I wasn't never going to make the Olympics, but like I got pretty good, and it helped me get into all of these fancy colleges, and I go to Stanford and I get into law school. Like I'm making my way in the world, and I'm messed up in a lot of different ways. I'm drinking a lot and I'm doing crazy stuff, but I believed in my capacity to solve problems and make my way in the world. And I wasn't waiting for somebody to like help me. And so that relationship with my own willfulness, my self-will, became like my superpower. Like I'll just outwork everyone, like whether it's in the class. I wasn't like a naturally gifted student either. And, everything that I achieved, I was convinced was because like I was determined to make it happen, until alcohol enters the picture and my life spirals out of control. And I finally find my way into sobriety. And they tell me like, you got to forget about that self-will. You think it's helping you. It's actually harming you, because alcoholism was the first problem that like my self-will couldn't solve, because the more determined I was to solve it on my own without asking for help or receiving help, the deeper the hole was that I was digging for myself, and the more impossible it became to like crawl my way out of it, until I was so broken that I was like, okay, I can't do this. Like I need to let people in and help me. And as somebody who for so many years kind of didn't let anyone in, didn't feel like I needed anyone, and any admission that I needed anyone was a sign of weakness, that was a very difficult like hurdle to overcome. But when you are broken and you're burning and you want to be that phoenix, like that is the way that you solve that equation. Like I had to be in that instance, the, caterpillar turning into glop, before I could become the butterfly. And for me, that meant like the glop phase was like realizing that I alone was going to be unable to solve this problem, that it was only going to be solved by letting go of that whole idea and finding a new way.
Merrell is so crazy versatile. I wear Merrells on all my runs, on the roads, on the trails. I walk my dog Bernini in Merrells. I wear Merrells to business meetings, and I even just wore the Speed Arc Surge Boa to my movie premiere in Hollywood, baby. I walk down the red carpet in these bad boys. I especially love the Boa lacing system and the Matrix upper. And these shoes have this dual density foam midsole, and that's where the bounciness and the durability comes from. For over 40 years, Merrell has been the global leader in hike, innovating, and crafting footwear designed for adventures of all speeds and sizes. Merrell believes in sharing the power of outside with everyone. From boots to hiking sneakers to trail running shoes, every silhouette is designed to deliver unmatched comfort and performance. For a limited time, we're partnering with Merrell to give you an exclusive offer of 25% off your first purchase order using code MentorBuffet25 when you check out on Merrell.com/Alexi. You can find my favorite Merrell shoes and gear at Merrell.com/Alexi. I keep my podcast studio stocked with Orgain at all times. Sometimes I even slip it into my guests' espresso drinks without telling them, and they always want to know the secret ingredient. My big secret is that it's Orgain's organic plant protein powder, and that one serving packs in 21 grams of protein, which is like the same as eating 3.5 eggs. It's hard to get enough protein in a day, especially when I'm running a lot like I am these days, and Orgain has all 9 essential amino acids, and none of the things I always try to avoid, like soy, artificial sweeteners, and preservatives. I put some of Orgain's strawberry plant powder in my smoothie after my run this morning, and let's just say Hailey Bieber still tasted like Hailey Bieber. Orgain believes real nutrition has the power to make a real difference in people's lives, and so far it has in mine. Remember, there are no quick fixes when it comes to your health. If you want more protein, give Orgain organic plant protein powder a try. Head to Orgain.com/MentorBuffet and use code MentorBuffet for 30% off your order. That's the best offer you'll find, but you have to use my code MentorBuffet for 30% off. One last time, for 30% off, head to Orgain.com/MentorBuffet and use my code MentorBuffet. A lot of people have not been in such a moment of I need to ask for help or else. What did it feel like to make the first outreach, and what was that, and who did you reach out to, and what did that feel like?
That was when all the other options were stripped away from me, I kicking and screaming. I mean, I got 2 DUIs in a row in a period of, I think there was like 4 or 6 weeks in between them. The first one was on Crescent Heights in Melrose at like 3 a.m. I rear-ended somebody driving home from a bar and went to jail that night and blew like a 0.23, like really high, like insanely high blood alcohol. And then the next one, I was driving the wrong way down at One-Way Street in Beverly Hills and got pulled over and blew a 0.21. And the cop took my wallet, saw my business card, and my boss, the partner in the law firm where I was working at that time, was representing the Beverly Hills Police Department and knew the cop. Like the cop knew my boss and called him and said, I picked your guy up. So I almost got fired from that. 2 DUIs in a row, facing jail time for sure, because you can't get away with 2 of them. And, when my lawyer was like, you got to go into the program. Like you have to at least show the judge that you're doing this. So I went reluctantly.
Right.
And that wasn't the end of the story. There was a lot of chaos after that until finally I was so broken that I went in willingly. So it wasn't like I welcomed it. I was just in a place where I was so broken, lost, alone, and without options that it was the only place to go.
When did it start feeling something that you did welcome? Like, was there a turning point where you started to trust help or something?
Well, I ended up going to a treatment center, and I showed up at this place in Oregon thinking I was going to be there for like 21 days because I had to. Like, I knew I had to get sober, but I was like, I got to get back to my job. And
right.
I have important things to do. Like, I have to do this. I'm going to check this box.
Yeah.
And then everything's going to be fine. And what happened was one of the first exercises they had me do was to write down, I think it was 10 instances of like a night out, like where you thought like you were going to do this and then like this crazy thing happened, right? Like to write out like, here was my intention. I was going to meet my friend and we were going to have 2 drinks. And then, suddenly I'm like naked in Las Vegas and I lost my wallet or like those kinds of things, right? So I wrote all of those out. Wow. And then I had to like present them in front of the group. And it was the first time that I was like really honest with like all my secrets and everything that I was doing, that I was so terrified that if anyone knew like that about me, that, there's these deep, deep secrets about like how I was actually behaving. Because you're living like 2 lives. You're holding yourself out to the world as somebody, thinking that they don't know what you're really doing. And that was a very cathartic experience. But my counselor pulled me aside after that and said, listen, based upon what you just shared, like your case of alcoholism is what we typically see in like 65-year-old lifelong drinkers. Like, you're a hard case. Unless you get this, it's not going to go well. And in my experience, people like you die. And so I know you want to like spin dry and get out of here. We think that you need to, kind of change your attitude around this experience, and stay longer than that. And I was able to, that was the first time I was able to like hear that and realize the gravity of the predicament that I was in, that my life was actually truly on the line. And that was like a switch that flicked. And I ended up staying there for like 100 days.
It had to be at such an extreme that it was beyond your control. I mean, life and death, right, was the only thing that it registered with you.
Yeah, it was
right?
For whatever reason, I was able to like, he wasn't the first person to tell me like, you're messed up, but it was the first time I was able to like really hear it.
Perhaps it was paired with the first time you were really, really honest in a way that was with your words, like to say the instances. Because I was thinking about that and I was like, wow, what if we all, with any of our issues, like maybe someone keeps having bad friendships or something keeps not going their way, if you could just write, how did I think this was going to start and how did it really go? If you're troubled in any way, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I was like, that
the
seems
other
like
piece to that. Sorry.
The
other piece to that is also like, then, like, how did it make me feel, or like what happened to me? And then also, importantly, how did it impact other people?
That was part of the process.
Yeah, because you think like, it's just me, leave me alone. Like I'm not bothering
Right.
anyone. I'm not harming anyone. And you have to really connect with like, oh, like your actions actually impact the people that you care about in ways you're probably not considering.
So for you to be really honest about what was cataloging your life in a way that was actually like honest, because if you were living this lie, right, to other people, you probably weren't processing it yourself until that point either.
No, because you're lying to everyone and you're lying to yourself. Like that's denial, right? And you're convincing yourself that other people can't see what is patently obvious.
Yeah.
Which is like they can see through your lies. They know what you're doing. They know how you're behaving. But it's so terrifying, the idea that they might actually know what's going on, that you tell yourself that they actually don't. And you have to pop that bubble.
What was worse though? Is it worse thinking that other people actually know what's going on, or that you actually see what's going on?
I mean, deep down, you know. Even if you're lying to yourself, you do know when your head hits the pillow, like you're like, yeah, man, like I know what I'm doing, but you're not really confronting it. So it's not like news to you necessarily. It's just something you would never say out loud or admit to anybody. And
admitting it.
I think it is powerful. That's why like at every AA meeting, like, you identify, hi, my name is so-and-so and I'm an alcoholic. Like you say it out loud.
Yeah. And that was the first step to you getting to not, it's basically, there was a difference in you getting help and you actually receiving help, because you went to get help because you went to tick a series of boxes.
Yeah. I mean, help was available the whole time.
Yeah.
And I went to AA meetings for a long time before I was ready to receive the help. So like you can have people around you who are trying to help you, but if you're not in a receiving mode, it doesn't really matter. And that's why it's so challenging and heartbreaking for loved ones of people that suffer from addiction who are like trying to help the person who's clearly suffering. But if that person isn't willing to receive the help, it's very unlikely that anything productive is going to come out of that. Like if you see like your parent and your child, your daughter is like going down a wrong path and you want to intervene and help, but they're not interested. Like that's the hardest thing that a parent can go through. And a very difficult, like almost intractable problem to solve until that person has had enough and is ready. Like, okay, now I'm ready to receive the help.
And your parents cut off,
they wanted to help. Yeah. Like they were like, we're here if you're ready to help, but they had to do the hardest thing, which is to say like, we're not available until that point, which I know probably one of the hardest things they've ever had to do.
Yeah.
Because they want to rush in and help and you want to solve the problem and make it okay.
Yeah.
I was able to, that was powerful. Like, oh, wow. Like they're not going to, come in and solve this problem for me. That was another kind of like lens tilt, that I think led me, made me willing to be willing.
Once you were willing to get help, do you feel like you just basically channeled that mentality into your healing? Like, were you just like, I will commit to this? Like it's my...
Yeah. So it's this interesting duality, right? There's a yin and a yang to it. Like on the one hand, I can apply my self-will and solve this problem. But also every time I do that, I'm crashing my car into a wall. Like you can't just rely on that to solve the problem. Yes, you need like, okay, I'm going to do this and I'm going to show up every day and I'm going to take commitments and I'm going to make coffee and I'm going to stick my hand out and meet people. Like all of that is important. That's like the active will part. But at the same time, you have to be willing to let go of your willingness,
because
be in this state of surrender and humility to say like every instinct I had about how to fix this problem for myself has proven wrong. And I don't know how to do this. The only way I'm going to make it through is to like let go of all of that and like surrender to a higher power. And if a higher power just means, hey, there's people in this room who have experience solving this problem. They're my higher power right now. I have to let them in. And when they say do this and don't do that, to take that direction, even if every instinct inside of me is like, no, that's wrong. Like, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go over here and do this. To say, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to listen to these people because I can't trust my instincts right now.
It's almost like you were on a freeway, like your whole life. You were like, I'm driving a car, I'm on a freeway. And it seems like getting help for you was just putting in a series of stop signs where someone was just going to decide, before you keep going, I'm going to tell you to go left or right. And then you can drive. And then you're going to go, I'm going to tell you to go left or right. Because you still needed to have some will. You weren't just like sitting back. You still had agency, but someone was telling you which direction to drive. And then you had to drive the car.
I think a lot of people will say, well, my gut told me, or my body is telling me I need to do this. And it's like, no, you're being impulsive and reactive. Like, unless you are kind of deeply tapped into yourself and have the capacity and the habit of knowing how to be kind of present and quiet with yourself, what is truly intuition gets clouded over by all this reactivity that you convince yourself is your intuition. So unless you like know yourself adequately and have done enough like emotional work and mental work to have that kind of deeper connection with yourself, you can easily kind of excuse impulsivity and call it intuition, and you will quickly be led astray. That's my experience. So I think like relying on your instincts, if you've been hijacked by substance abuse or some other version of that, it could be, childhood trauma due to like poor programming by your parents or your coaches or whatever like neural pathways you have going on that are leading you astray, you can confuse them for your instinct or your intuition. And I think getting healthy, at least in my case, in my experience, I had to relearn all of those things, and I couldn't trust myself. And I had to vest that trust in these other people until I had kind of done enough work to get to the point where I could slowly begin to trust myself again.
And when was that?
I mean, years, many, many years. And it's still a thing. What I want to do and what's in my best interest are usually not, simpatico.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Like in a moment and in a moment, especially.
And we know like anyone, like take the example of, let's say you have a friend and she's constantly picking the wrong guy, to get into a relationship with, and it always ends the same way. And that way is badly. Right. And then here she is again, and she's like, that's the guy. And like, okay, no, I don't think so. She can't see that because she's in a loop, right?
Yes, loops.
And she's also not really open to like your feedback, because in her programming and whatever's going on in her like neural chemistry, like she's attracted to that person for whatever reason, probably because of something that happened to her when she was very young, right? She got wired in a certain way. And so she thinks that's her intuition. She doesn't realize that she's acting in accordance with this implant, like this program that was laid on top of her like neurobiology. And it takes a friend, a mentor, or somebody to point that out, but that person has to be receptive to that. She can't trust her instincts about the kind of relationship that she should be in or not be in until she's suffered enough and realizes like, oh, I need to let somebody else guide me until I can guide myself.
Anytime you met somebody, did you go through a process of like, do I trust this person? Or were you
Sure.
just like,
I mean, especially early in sobriety, you're like, people, hey, what's your name? Like, what's going, here's my phone number, call me. And you're like, I'm not going to call you. Like, you're like, what's your angle? Like, what do you want from me? Is this a scam? So there's a lot of that early on before you learn to kind of like trust other people. And there were plenty of people over the years who were like foundational and incredibly helpful to me in kind of guiding my decision making and looking out for me and my best interests. But it's not any kind of one singular person. There's a saying in recovery, like, look to the winners or trust the winners or search out for the winners. And the newcomer will say, well, who are the winners, or how do I tell who the winners are? And the answer is we take turns.
Oh, wow.
Because we're all like fucked up, addicts in recovery, and we have good days and bad days, and sometimes we're on our game and sometimes we're not. But it's so diffused. You're going to these meetings, you're meeting hundreds and hundreds of people. Every meeting is different people. You hear something that resonates with you, you connect with that person. The next day you connect with a different person. So it's like this, kind of underground network of support, and just this incredible miracle of selfless service. Like I really think it's just a remarkable thing that it not only has persisted since its inception, but has grown into like this global phenomenon that hasn't like, imploded, because there's no leadership structure. It's completely, it's like, there's no boss, there's no organizing committee. Like each meeting is its own thing. And so there's no kind of power struggle that is usually the death knell for like most organizations.
And it challenged your way of governing yourself, not only to be someone who asked for help, but somebody who didn't have one governor. You weren't looking to one coach anymore.
No, I mean, you have a sponsor and they take you through the steps, and then people change sponsors and get different people for different stages of life. And, everyone's flawed and imperfect, and, that just kind of goes with it. But yeah, it's not about like any singular person.
Sometimes I drink and sometimes I don't, but I've never taken an intentional break from alcohol until just recently. I made a conscious effort and just finished my first ever dry January, leaning on Go Brewing as my non-alcoholic alternative. I decided to take a break from alcohol because I was having trouble healing this broken collarbone from the Olympics in Paris this summer, and opting for a Go Brewing non-alcoholic beer helped me keep my inflammation down, and my energy and sleep has been a lot better too. I've kind of fallen in love with the Jab Jab Grapefruit IPA. It's my favorite right now. It's my citrus fix in the winter, and you will love it. It's tangy and refreshing, and you've got to give it a try. If you ever thought non-alcoholic beer couldn't deliver, Go Brewing will prove you wrong. Head to gobrewing.com/Alexi to get 15% off your order. Because sometimes the point isn't about what you're giving up, it's about what you're gaining. You have another big turn in your life, right? That you've talked about a lot, about transitioning from being a lawyer to being basically an athlete influencer to now this cultural influencer and having a podcast. And it seems like that transition was a lot more, you realized something needed to change. There was no one that was going to make you change course, right? That was you.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering, was it just you? Like, were there conversations during that time? Were there people before you made the shift, like the catalyst for the shift?
Yeah, I mean, I think my wife is the principal figure in that transition. I had been sober for like 9 years. I had built this foundation of sobriety. And during that period of time, I was very intent on like getting back to where I was before, this like respectable, responsible, like upwardly mobile, like kind of, career ambitious person that people would look to and say, he's on his way, But at no point did I do the deeper work of like trying to like know myself. Like I never reflected inward to think like, what do I want to do? Who am I? And like, what am I here to express? And what kind of person do I want to be? Like, those weren't the questions that I was entertaining. I was just driven by like, I guess this embarrassment and also need for external validation that I could be that kind of person that I thought like society would smile upon. And it had nothing to do with like my heart or any, like I was so disconnected from myself to the point where that disconnection became profound enough to create like kind of an existential crisis. Like I was like, I hate this career that I'm in. I don't know how to get out of it. I don't even know who I am. What would I even do? I had no concept of that at all. And Julie was just this really gentle, beautiful guide to help me kind of connect with my heart and start to honor and listen to like what my body was trying to express. And so all the changes that I made were really a function of like me turning my inquiry inward and saying, well, what would make me happy, or what would feel good, or what feels right to me? And it was really simple stuff. It was like, you know what? I really miss like just feeling strong in my body, or like, you know, what it feels like to like push myself. And that's what got me back into getting fit again, or taking care of myself with food. And none of these things had anything to do with goals. Like I was in this sort of post self-will era of my life where I was just trying to honor my curiosity and honor myself. Like, oh, you know what would feel, you know, like I really would like to do this today. And instead of finding a reason why that's irresponsible, I would just say, I'm actually going to do that. Like, I'm going to go to the pool today and go for a swim for no reason other than like, that's just what I feel like doing right now. And I'd never done that before. Like, just like, what is my body telling me? And I had done enough work to get to the point where I could trust that. And so it was really a function of just listening to that. And literally every single thing that I've done, from all the ultra endurance events to writing Finding Ultra to starting the podcast, none of them had anything to do with like me setting a goal. Like they were really divine intervention, you know, kind of the universe coming in to support this curiosity, which felt like real and earned and true to who I was. So in this meta sense, I think, and I've been spending a lot of time thinking about this, that everything that you desire, if it's true, will be made manifest in proportion to the level of commitment that you have to knowing yourself. And to know yourself is like a really profound, like we could do 4 hours on that, but honestly, like that connection with yourself, which requires presence and quietude, all the answers are in there. And I think when you continue to honor that and foster that and nurture that, everything else sort of takes care of itself. And that's my experience.
It seems like Julie helped you find the space to ask yourself the questions to get to know yourself, because the question that you said a few minutes ago that you asked yourself is, what do I want to do today? Like, what do I feel like doing right now? In the simplest terms. And you're like, I want to go swimming. And I think that that's really cool that the question you asked yourself wasn't so big and grand at first. It was, what do I want to do right now? Instead of what do I want to do with my life, or even who am I? Because that's really a scary question for people to ask.
Yeah, how are you supposed to answer that? I think it goes back to the present moment. Like all the answers are in the present, and every goal that you have or ambition, these lofty ideas of where you want your life to head and what it would look like when you get there, are really a function of like, what are you going to do right now? You know, like, and those things are always tiny little things that are easy to shrug off or ignore. And I think making space for that and honoring that, that's how you build anything.
And it's easy to shrug them off as a distraction because you've made a plan, and the plan you made for today was made yesterday or the day before.
Right. And Julie would be like, well, you should go do that, as opposed to, that's dumb. Why would you go do that? You need to do this, you know, by giving me the space and saying, listen to yourself. If that's what if that's where your heart is, then that's absolutely what you should go do right now.
And you did it gradually, but certainly, right? Like you had to
years and years and years.
Because you were still like you had to basically, because I think also some people see these drastic changes and they're like, I will quit my job and start the thing I'm meant to be doing tomorrow, and it will just happen. And it seems like yours is a gentle curiosity that was like ushered along and encouraged by Julie. And then you were the one that was like continuing to nurture it and explore it until it became inevitable. Basically, it was so obvious to you.
Yeah, I don't know if it was inevitable or ever obvious, because I think when you're in, like when you look back, it all makes perfect sense. But when you're in it, it's often, very confusing.
What kind of thoughts did you have when you were in it?
Well, it was insane. I mean, I was, this lawyer who was like, okay, I'm going to train for Ultraman, which is like, a huge time commitment. We were broke. I was still practicing law, but I was not interested in it and not making very much money. And we were having trouble paying our bills, and we have babies and a mortgage. And, it on paper, it's like the worst idea ever. And friends, family, everybody was like, you guys are insane. Like, what are you doing? And Julie had my back. She's like, you need to do this. Like all the answers that the answers to all these questions that you have about what you should be doing, all of those answers are on the other side of this experience. Cause she knew that, like, this is true to who you are and it doesn't make any sense. But she had this trust and this faith that was unwavering and truly like superhuman, because her friends would say, like, what is going on in your house? We're having cars repossessed. Like, it was crazy for many years. Very, very difficult.
I find that so inspiring, because it's like it's so hard to not be afraid during those times.
And we were afraid, and I was afraid. And without her trust and faith and support, I would have quickly hightailed it back to some law firm job.
Really? So it was like, basically, she was so steady and so grounded in this like position of like, this is the only way. The only way is into you, right? And to honor that every single day as a choice. And she was so solid that you didn't waver.
100%. I mean, I wavered in my trust. Like I there were plenty of times where I was like, I think I'm crazy. Like I think I might be like, I've lost my way completely.
Well, because it probably allowed you the space to actually not be such a high performer in the moment, to actually find what you were meant to be doing, right?
But also all of that time alone, like on the bike or on the trails or whatever, like you have that solitude where you're like sitting in that discomfort and like trying to make sense of it. And there is that kind of active meditation thing that's happening when you're in that zone 2 state, where it's not a proper meditation practice, but it is meditative, where you're kind of getting to know yourself.
What is that for you? Is it like self-talk? Is it just listening? Like, what does it feel like to be in that for you?
I mean, as you know, like there's sort of there's like a mild euphoria, because you're in the kind of hormones are cruising. And so you feel really good and powerful.
Yeah.
But you're present too, you're kind of just present with yourself. It's just like your breath, and time like bends. Like it would get to the point where I would go on these 8-hour rides, but it didn't, like, if the beginning of the season, if I was to do that, it would feel like interminable, right? But then you kind of build up to that, where you're in this weird timeless zone where, I went that far and that long, but it didn't really feel like that. It felt like 2 hours. And there's something about that where I don't know how to put words to it. But I think just being in that elevated heart rate state is a form of like figuring out how to be present with yourself. That is its own teacher that connects you more deeply with who you are. And I think the more present I was, the more I developed the capacity to not engage with the fear of the unknown future, or to live my life in a story loop based upon my past, and to just be like, this is what I'm doing right now. And this is like all there is. And right now everything is fine. And I have $5 and we're going to be able to like make rice and beans tonight for dinner. And that's it. And Julie was so expert in maintaining her neutrality throughout this. Like it was really powerful. I've told this story before, but the repo man came to take away my truck one day, and she kind of met him in the driveway and brought him tea and said, "How are you doing? What's going on? Like, can I help you? Do you need to use the bathroom?" And he was so freaked out because he's used to people screaming at him or whatever. And he was met with an unusual amount of kindness that he took the car and left like completely bewildered. And Julie looked at me and she's like, because I was agitated, and she's like, "They can take all the stuff, but they can't rob you of your humanity. Like, these are just things. And, you know, we're in this thing right now. We're seeing it through, and you just have to remember that. And all the other aspects of this, like, it's a choice as to whether you're going to engage with the fear or make a story around what it means or allow it to like impact your sense of yourself or your esteem."
Mm-hmm. She's such a role model. Like
she's a rock star.
Yeah.
You know,
her presence too is such a, like, it's such a, you know, it's like a cloud. It's like a color. It's like a color around her when you're around her.
you see her aura.
She's always in her aura,
Yeah.
which was, she's like one of the only people that I feel like isn't as, at least in LA, where people are so affected by other people. That was something in Paris. I was like, oh, the people there are not as affected by other people. But she seems like she's like developed this like aura that
she's definitely, carries a very powerful energy.
Yeah, it's
wherever
awesome.
she goes. My new obsession is this podcast series. Have you listened to this, called the Telepathy Tapes?
No.
Oh my God. I'm obsessed.
Okay.
You have to check this out.
Tell me about it.
So this documentary filmmaker, here's a podcast with a scientist who starts studying autistic children and realizing that they have telepathic powers, that they can communicate telepathically with their mom or their parents, and goes on this exploration. There's like 12 episodes of this or 10 episodes. It's a lot, right? And realizes that like there's real legitimacy in this, which is just reflect on that for a moment. Like that these neurodivergent people are operating with a different type of consciousness, or they're tapped into the flow of consciousness and are able to communicate and live their lives in a state of pure consciousness. Like in the podcast gets into like the nature of consciousness itself. And there is this idea that I've been spending a lot of time thinking about prior to listening to this podcast, that the material world as we know it is actually an illusion. In reality, the substrate or the foundation of the universe isn't like matter, like subatomic particles. It's actually consciousness, and matter is like a product of consciousness itself. That truly all there is consciousness. And I raise that because I think that even if it's just a thought experiment to like accept that as true, if you believe that to be true and you understand that we're all one thing existing in a state of consciousness, when you can attune your thoughts and your behavior with like a higher resonance or a higher kind of state of awareness, in my experience, like that's where all of these answers arrive. And it's the same thing where a musician or an author will say like, I just channeled this song. Like I was sort of a receiver for it. Like they're tapped into like that flow of consciousness. And I think in reflecting back upon my story, the things that I've been able to kind of create have been a product, as I said earlier, not of like setting goals and being willful about them, but being more in a state of allowing, like, how can I be more of a receiver rather than like a broadcaster?
Which is interesting because you have a podcast where you are you're allowing space for people to share that then people are receiving, which is
I'm broadcasting.
That's like some more. But with regards to these material objects, It's also interesting because you had this, like, you have your the alcoholism, and then the job navigation, and all the material things being challenged and like maybe compromised during this other transition. But if you took all of those away as like the most important thing, like if they weren't even a factor, like if consciousness was a higher element, and if those weren't, then those are just distractions too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like if the car and all that, like if all that stuff doesn't really matter, even though we have to have some basics to live, then a lot of what you have been doing is getting further and further away from being dragged down by things that are not as primary, you know?
But it's hard because you're attached
really
to
hard.
them, and you have this idea of what it means to be a success and what it means to be a failure. And I'm a dyed-in-the-wool people pleaser, you know, and have for most of my life been overly influenced by other people's expectations or opinions of who I am. And if you're directed in that way, you're probably not looking inward and making decisions based upon your own internal compass.
Mm-hmm. Do you care less about what people think of you now?
Way less.
Way less.
Yeah, way less. Yeah.
Thank you for coming on, and thank you for having me in your network. If you're enjoying Mentor Buffet, follow Voicing Change for more inspirational and truly life-affirming content from shows like Soul Boom, The Proof, Feel Better, Live More, and the Rich Roll podcast. Just go to voicingchange.media. That's voicingchange.media for a beautiful selection of productive and positive shows.